Lies the issue. Since you guys did the appointment, there have been numerous resignations because he doesn't maintain the quality, doesn't maintain the respect or the consideration of the men that are working for him. Symbolized by the termination where he's attempting to terminate a certified firefighter with no just cause. Again, I have a prepared statement.
If you would be as brief as possible, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll just read my prepared statement and give it to you guys.
Absolutely.
Okay? The obvious upheaval in the town's fire department and the very public awareness of the discourse amongst the fire department and its leadership is an issue. Of interest are the status of several resignations pending of the fire department volunteers that we, the community of taxpayers and legislative body, have paid to see trained with the ultimate goal in mind. I recall my time on the budget committee, and since then, as ex officio, hearing the fire department present their budget with a focus on being able to respond to calls for mutual aid and for the purpose of the town being provided with mutual aid support from surrounding communities. We've put a lot of money into the breathing apparatus, the battery packs, the radios, the rebreather that needed to be repaired that was exclusively to have available so that we could support mutual aid. And as of today, we are no longer able to support mutual aid, so we just flushed about $125,000 down the toilet in the last 3 to 5 years, only to start all over with trainees and a handful of guys that have been around for decades. In fact, to that point, several of the guys that we have had trained have dedicated their time to training and certification are no longer viable with the department. And the chief's suggestion is that we have others get certified to a lower standard because it costs less money for EMR instead of EMT. Or any alternative, we pay for training of individuals once again because the people we've already paid to have trained will not work with the current chief. His response instead was to berate them in the meeting. I listened to the recording on July 9th meeting, and I remind you guys that it was decided it would not be a non-public meeting. Every single time that Mr. Labonte was asked about his qualifications, his response was to throw someone else under the bus. Guys aren't dedicated to their training. We have dedication problems, not a qualifications problem. He says, yeah, allegations are just that, and anybody can make an allegation. But there was never any actual response to Mark's qualifications or what they are. In fact, when asked about his qualifications, he pulled out files of the other guys on the department, and he focused on them instead of answering the question. He in fact stated, there's a guy with 35 years that doesn't have any qualifications either, emphasis added. So in that one sentence, he admitted he doesn't have qualifications, but he wanted to focus on everyone else instead of himself.
That's a mischaracterization.
This is a direct quote from the recording, so I will continue. When responding to what the qualifications he does have, he said, all the paperwork I got over the years was lost when the state went to computer records. Now I ask you, how was the paperwork that Mark had in his possession lost by the state going to computer records? That's a direct quote from him. All the paperwork I got was lost when the state went to computer records, end quote. He said, what he does have is multiple awards for leadership. Then he followed up again with saying, we're not talking about a certification problem, we have a dedication problem, and he focused his reply on the men in his command as being the problem. This illuminates exactly the problem that I have with Mark Labonte as chief. His focus is more about throwing others under the bus and not on the question at hand. The same was true when he brought up Jamie Moulton, and now in response to the question about himself, he deflects. This isn't really, there really isn't any bigger betrayal in my mind to throw other guys under the bus to take the focus off yourself. Nevertheless, that's not leadership. Labonte focuses on issues with the fire department between Nate, Marshall, Spencer, and Stephen Aruda as gossip. That completely detracts from the question of his qualifications. He talked about a training they had attended where things didn't all go exactly right. Captain walked out and said he was going home, and Mark says, "I'm 62 years old, don't you think I'm tired too?" He claims that the discussion they had that night was not the same thing he heard about at 8 o'clock the following morning. So again, Mark's response was, "This is gossip, 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 that's the problem with the fire department." Present that day at that meeting, in addition to David Thompson, was Paul Guild. And to his credit, Mr. Guild said to Mark, one of the problems that they're having is with your qualification. So I don't think I heard, what are your qualifications? In response, Mark said, I have, again, direct quote, I have, my qualifications are, well, the only thing I have to stand by, right, to be perfectly honest with you, is the plaques and awards for dedication that I've gotten over the years. All my qualifications in the past have been gone from, well, when the state went to paper records. Paul stated in the form of a question, "You have no backup proofs?" And Mark said, "I have no records." And then rather quickly, Mr. Bresnahan spoke up and said, "Mark, why don't you talk about your time in Guilford?" Mark's profession was that he was a call firefighter for 25 years, non-medical, multiple things that I've done, but I don't have the paperwork. In response, Paul stated, therein lies the problem. Paul stated that he believed the standard of qualification needs to be looked into, and also said, more importantly, what do we do about the fire department now? Mark relies on the certifications of the others to satisfy the requirements of the department, but not his. Even though he has no qualifications of his own, and then went to talking about how we pay Bristol $70,000 a year for EMS, but then he continued on to berate 5 other firefighters for their service after making that statement. The selectmen seem to be okay with Mark not being qualified. The town has a right to hear this and partake in that decision, is my belief. And at minute 40 and 41 seconds on the recording, Mark said, "If the town thinks I'm not qualified, then so be it." I'm demanding a public hearing in response to that statement. I think the town has a right to hear whether or not the chief that we have running our fire department, doing our budget, and everything else that Mark professes to be qualified to do, should prove that he's qualified.
So, Jamie Moulton made him deputy chief.
I heard you say this on the tape too.
And for the last year that Jamie was there.
Yeah. And
Mark,
people change. Sean, people change. I saw it in the year in the last year that Mark was there.
So, Charlie, I just sat here and listened to you read your statement. I didn't interrupt you. Can I finish making my statement and then you can rebut it?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Mark, when Jamie made him deputy, he was too busy doing his duties at Hebron, and Mark ran his department. He did the budgeting, he did all that. What you don't know is back this spring, 5 officers all said they were going to resign if Jamie didn't resign.
Your assumption is I don't know that. I do know that.
You do know that, okay.
I do know
But nobody else here knows that. You kind of left that out.
Because we didn't have any kind of public hearing or anything, and you guys didn't perform any kind of process. There was no hiring process for the fire chief. There was your decision. Your decision. I remind you the night that Mark was appointed, the 3rd selectman in this room walked in and says, "What are we doing here?" And you guys said, "Oh, we're swearing in Mark." And he said, "I didn't know anything about this. What are you talking about?" When was that decision made?
There's another member of the public that would like to be heard. Paul.
Yeah, I was at that meeting. I have a couple of questions. One was, why weren't other members of the department notified of this meeting? I don't know if, unless you guys did, and if I'm wrong on this, tell me. Did any of you sit down with those 4 firefighters to talk out their grievances? Did you get the chief to sit down with them to
Yes.
talk out their grievances?
We were all in here at the same time.
Pardon me?
We were all in here in the room at the same time.
Well,
what meeting were you talking about? Because there was one meeting where there was a handful,
Right. Was the,
and there was
There was
another
a-
meeting where they actually said their grievances.
Yeah, that was a
That
selectmen's
was,
meeting.
that was a public
Yeah.
selectmen's meeting. At that meeting, which was not a fire night, whatever you wanna call it, the chief was here. There were at least 4 or 5,
But he left.
but he left.
That's right.
Now,
So
he
have you
left
sat
because
down
he had,
since then? Were
so they aired their grievances at that
Or
meeting.
did you sit down and try to iron out the differences with the chief?
Because of the public
There's-
setting,
there's-
it wasn't set up for that.
Yeah, right. You could have done that with that public meeting that you called. You could have called.
It would have been better with the
Yeah.
chief here.
The chief was at that public meeting.
He left.
No, no,
But-
I'm talking about the special meeting.
can I just interject something in
So-
terms of,
so
they
you-
had already resigned.
So you're just saying, oh, the heck with them. There are 4 guys that we paid to get qualified,
Right.
certified, paid to be EMTs, and we just don't wanna put any effort into keeping them.
But they're adults, I mean, and they made a
They,
decision.
so those two were also the ones who said if the
Still-
past chief didn't resign, they would resign.
It's the same, was exactly the same people in that.
I'm trying to clarify what meeting we're talking
Well,
about,
it's-
because one of them we
It was the
can't.
regular selectmen's meeting immediately prior to,
I'd love to talk about the other one, but I can't.
Well, you can say there was a meeting to work, try to work through the.
I'm sorry, Joanne had her hand up. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Mr. Estes, the first year that Jamie was hired as chief after D. Ford was what year? 2020? Okay? You were not ex officio in 2020, correct?
No, that's correct, I was on the budget committee.
You were on the budget committee?
2017, 18, 19,
20 you were not.
it may have been 18, 19, 20. So I was
It
the
wasn't-
chairman.
I know it wasn't 20, because I was on the budget committee and you were not. Okay, when Jamie Moulton came on and he presented to the budget committee, he presented a budget, and then when we asked the fire department to come back in, his men showed up, and his men were not happy that, they complained at the budget meeting, and you were there for that one, that he wasn't filling out